Hi, it's Patrick. In this video, I'm going to focus on showing you how to create the plain 502 project and the 502 project. This semester, there's going to be a series of videos like these that briefly show you how to create the main project for the given week, for the given module. Over the semester, the videos will become less prescriptive, less scaffolding, to really help you then start applying the concepts that you're learning. Now, I'm assuming first that you've spent some time looking through some of the Atomic Learning videos, that you already kind of know the basics of HTML through the reading and the course resources. And so with that, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to show you how to create something like this, which is what we call the plain 502 page, and then this, which is the 502 page, which is where you actually take that HTML page and you add some CSS. So both of these projects are essentially just introducing you to Dreamweaver, introducing you to web development, HTML5, and CSS. More specifically, the goal is to create a page like this that we call your 502 page that lists all of the projects in your course. Be sure to look at your syllabus in your course and the Moodle course shell to make sure that your project list mirrors what's expected in your given course, because instructors could change things from time to time. So with that, let's get started. So I'm going to open Dreamweaver Creative Cloud. Okay, so your Dreamweaver view might look a little different. I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm going to go File, New. And I'm going to save this. I'm going to make sure that HTML is selected, None, in HTML5, and hit Create. So now I've created this file, I'm going to save it. I try to do this right away. So I'm going to call this plain 502. But I'm going to do another thing right here, and that's I select one place on my computer where I'm going to save all my files. This is really important. So I have a folder called Websites. In it, I'm going to create a folder called EDTECH2. Within that, I'm going to create three folders. One's called 502. You could create more than one folder for each course that you take. But I'm going to now create one called Styles and one for Images. You will later create additional folders for such things as videos. You could even for audio or anything else for that matter. It's just a way of having a clear system of where you want to save your file. So I'm in my EDTECH2 folder. I'm going to hit Save in my 502 because this is where I want to save all of my HTML files. Okay, now that I've created the folders and I've saved this page, I'm going to do an additional step. So I'm going to create a site. Dreamweaver used to call this creating a site definition. Now they'll often just refer to as creating a new site. But I'm going to create a new site, and this helps manage my folders and helps everything work better. So I'm going to give it a site name as EDTECH2. I'm just going to use this for all of my EDTECH2. You could technically create a new site for each project or each course if you wanted to. I'm going to select that folder. Now I'm telling Dreamweaver where I'm going to basically save all of my files. So it's the EDTECH2 folder. And so yours should look something like this. And we'll later in another video show you how to actually create a server and help you FTP the files, that is, upload them to the server later. For now, we're just creating that site definition. So once I did that, what you'll notice over here, if you have the Files panel open, is I can click on this and I can see there is my plain 502 file that I saved. And I have nothing right now in my Images and Styles folder. So everything looks good. I'm going to do one more step. I'm going to go to Windows. I'm going to select Properties. I like to have the Properties Inspector actually docked. So I'm going to drag it down until it turns blue down here, like that. Okay, that looks good. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to Document Title. And I'm going to change this to plain 502. One last thing I'm going to do is your version in Dreamweaver might look a little different than this. If you've used previous versions of Dreamweaver, you might be more used to this code split view being set up a little differently. So one of the things that I like to do, over the years I've gotten used to having my code view split vertically. So I do that, and then I also like my design view this way. Now, also be aware of another change is there's this live view that's been incorporated in design view. I'm mostly going to be working in design view. It's more that I think that's what I'm comfortable with, and it's similar to previous versions. I think it's also important when you're learning Dreamweaver to focus on the design view. And the split view allows you to see a little bit of code, but we're going to be doing a lot over here and a little over in the code view, or the code side of it. And then over time, as you become more comfortable, spend some time checking out the live view and some of those options. So let's take a look at the example. So in this example, if I right click, I can view my page source and I can see the HTML. So there's basically a header tag, there's a section tag, there's actually 2 section tags for 2 bits of information, then there's a footer tag. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into Dreamweaver and we're going to create that. So with my cursor right up top, you can basically create these tags in a number of ways. You can go through Insert, and there's some options down here under Structure, but what I like to do is often use the Insert panel. And if you don't see this, you can go to Window and make sure it's selected, and then I make sure that I have Structure selected. Over here, this is where I can hit Header. I'm just going to hit OK. I'm going to make sure my cursor is right outside of that. I'm going to hit Section, hit OK. Do that twice, and now Footer. So sometimes if I'm working on this, I might actually simplify this language just so I can get a basic overview of what this should look like. So now that I do this, I like to drag this over and take a look. But right now, this is a basic structure that you're going to see throughout the semester, something similar to this. And it's a header tag, a section tag, and a footer tag. Now, sometimes I might even take this whole bit and put it in something called a div, and a div specifically that we call a container. And a container is basically a box to keep everything nice and tidy. So I'm going to actually go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click on div, and instead of a class, I'm going to call this container. Now, you'll notice that what it did was it put it up top here. What I'm going to do is drag this closing div tag down here. I'm going to basically get rid of that text up there. I'm going to apply source formatting. Now you can see what I basically did. I created everything within this basically box, this div that I called container. Now when we create the 502 page later and add some styles, we'll actually do some things to that container and it'll even become more useful. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to basically just start putting in the text. So in this case, I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to copy the text that I already have here from this previous example. Whenever you're working with Word or Notepad or something, it's important to kind of try to strip the formatting. So I'm using TextEdit. You could also use Notepad on a PC. And with TextEdit, by default, it's rich text. So you want to make sure you change it to plain text. But when I basically copy my text on here, it strips all the formatting. I like that because then when I copy it, it's going to paste in here a lot better. I'm just going to move some of this text around. I'm going to insert copyright by going to Insert, Character, Copyright. There's a few other things I'm going to do. Is always be aware when you copy and paste that sometimes it doesn't really work the way you want. So what you've learned so far from your introductory material on HTML is that there's something called a paragraph tag. And like most HTML tags, the paragraph tag has an opening and a closing tag. Now in some cases, when you copy and paste things specifically into Dreamweaver, a paragraph tag isn't always created where you think it should. And so sometimes when you copy and paste, you want to go through and clean some stuff up. Now, specifically in this case, this is something that I want to be as a bulleted list. And so I'm going to have to spend some time creating that. Now, if I put my cursor here, as long as I have the Properties Inspector open, and down here if I make sure HTML is selected, I can hit this bullet for an unordered list. And you can see it basically gives a opening UL tag for unordered list, and you can see the closing tag way down here, and then it basically creates an LI, right? A list item. So a list item, it thinks this is all a list, but what I'm going to do is basically just change this, and I'm basically, using I'm backing up and I'm hitting return or enter, and it's creating a new list item for each one of these. Make this an H1, so I'm going to make sure I have HTML selected, and I'm going to go down here and make that an H1 or a heading 1. And then project list, I'm going to make that an H2. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to preview it. Okay, So I can compare it to the example. Looks pretty good. The example has a horizontal rule. It also has basically an validation badge showing that the code has been validated. And I can click on it and it actually rechecks it. So what we'll do is we'll do those two things now. So I'll put my cursor between my two sections. I'm going to go to Insert, Horizontal Rule. It's going to add that horizontal rule. And then I'm going to basically add an image down here. There's going to be another video that really talks about how to validate your HTML and your CSS. But right now I'm going to give you a quick introduction. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to Google HTML5 validation badges. And if I go down here, I can see that someone's already created some of these. And so these are some that I like. They're a little smaller, so they give a little more modern feel. And so I'm just going to go ahead and save this. Now I'm going to save it in my images folder. And then I'm going to jump back to Dreamweaver and I'm going to go to Insert, Image. And if I go in my images folder, there it's set. So I'm going to click Open. Now it's a little hidden right here, so if I actually hide this, you can see it. I'm going to save this and I'm just going to check my code real quick. Like I said, we'll have another video that goes into this more in depth. But in Dreamweaver, I can go to File, Validate, and I can click Validate and OK. And it's now checking this, and it says that, well, I'm missing a heading for this section up here. So what it's basically telling me is that it would like to have a heading up here. So I could put my cursor up here, go down, and I can type About Me. If I go back to Properties Inspector, do H2, now you'll notice that if I do it, if I save it, and I validate, I get no errors. So that looks great. So now let's just go ahead and preview this. So just like that, I've created a fully functioning website, and this is what's called the Plain 502 project. I would want to go ahead and validate this and have a link to the validation, which there's going to be another video on that, and upload it to the EDTECH 2 server. And we have another video on how to FTP or upload your files. But for now, this looks pretty good. It looks really similar to the example here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a minute, we're going to add some CSS to this. Now always be aware that you can right click and view page source. You can take a look at some of the CSS that's been applied. Basically, the body tag has some styles, the H1, H2 does, in each one of the HTML5 structure elements, specifically the header section and the footer. And there's actually even a class and an ID down here. So that looks good. So what we're going to do is create something like that. So now I'm going to do a save as, because we want you to actually turn in two different assignments for this. And this one's going to be called the 502 page. So you notice how when I do that, now I have everything there and I can actually close that previous file. But what I'm going to do now is add some CSS. Dreamweaver's changed the way that you use CSS a great deal with Dreamweaver CC. But basically, if you have your files panel open and if you click on CSS Designer, this is where they want you to do most of your CSS. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how you kind of go through this process. So the first thing you do is you want to create a CSS file. So I'm going to click the plus sign, create new CSS, and I'm going to browse and tell it where I want it. I'm going to save all my CSS in my styles folder, and I'm going to call this 502. I'm going to save it and click OK. So now I have my CSS file. So the next thing I do is I have this habit of I click on the tag, I click on the CSS file I want to add it on, and then I click the plus sign, and when I do, it automatically brings it up. So then if I click down here in the properties area, I can add some basically properties, or I can add some styles to the body tag. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a font family that I want, and I'm going to use Gotham. And basically the way this works is with these fonts, it starts with the first font, and it looks to see if the user has this on his or her computer, in this case Gotham. If they don't, then it looks for Helvetic and it goes down the list. So the next thing I'm going to do is font size. I'm going to go to percent. I'm going to say 100. I'm going to do two other things. I'm going to add a font color. In this case, I know the color I want to use. And I'm going to add a background color because you notice that contrast is really bad. In this case, it's starting to take shape. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm I'm going to click on container. I'm going to click 502. I'm going to click the plus sign, and down here, this is where we're going to add a basic width. I'm just going to do this in pixels. I'm going to do 960. I'm going to scroll down, and under margin, I'm going to do a left margin of auto and a right margin of auto. And what that's going to do is it's going to center that container div for me. Okay, now I'm going to work down each of my main parts. I'm going to start with my header. I'm going to click on header, click 502, click plus sign. I'm going to start with my font color. I'm going to choose a background color. Then I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to add some padding. I'm going to add 10 pixels all the way around. I'm going to add basically 5 pixels for bottom margin. Now if you look at the example, you'll also notice that there's this little bit of curve, right? That border radius. So if I scroll down, you'll see that I have this option down here. I can basically, I'm going to do 5 pixels. So now I'm going to jump down. I'm going to go to section 502, click the plus sign. And just go ahead and add my background color. And jump up here, and you notice that when I click these, it's just scrolling me up and down. Okay, so now I'm going to do a couple more things. I'm going to add a line height. So that's basically the spacing between the lines. So I'm just going to do, say, 1.5 em. That looks good. I'm going to jump up, and I'm going to add 10 pixels of padding. And jump down here to my footer. I'm going to click on my footer. I'm going to do font size. So in this case, I'll just do something smaller, say 10 pixels. And I'm going to actually center my font, and well, see, I can tell when I have an error, right? So if I undo, it let me get back. So I basically did a Control Z to get back where I was at. But essentially what happened was, I thought I was in the footer, but I was actually still in my section. So this is where you want to be careful and make sure that 502, make sure that I have footer selected, because if not, I start adding styles to something I didn't mean to. Usually you can catch it and quickly fix it, but that can become a problem if you don't catch it right away. So I'm going to do 10 pixels, I'm going to text align, and I'm going to actually separate these. Okay. So I'm going to save all, and I'm going to preview this. Okay, so it looks pretty good. I could actually go ahead and get rid of this horizontal rule possibly. And if I want to, I could play with actually making that just one giant section. Web developers debate kind of between an article and a section, and whether you should have lots of sections, and articles should go in the article tag, whether it should go within a section or vice versa. And so for now, we're kind of treating sections as you create a new section tag for a meaningful bit of information. And so in this case, this was one meaningful chunk, and this was another. So let's save all. Let's preview. So there's definitely, the font is a little different. This has a different color, which we could definitely keep. In this case, it looks like the horizontal rule is just integrated into it. But essentially what we're going to do now is add a couple classes so we can make these different colors. And we'll actually go ahead and change the font for the H1. So if I go up and if I click on H1, I can go back to the CSS designer and I can look for my H1, but in this case I don't have it. So I'm going to click H1. I'm going to click that, and then what I'm going to do is down here I'm just going to add font family. So I'm going to choose something like this. But I'm going to actually say I want to start with Verdanda. That's what I want to be my first font. And that looks good. And if we do like the example, the horizontal rule, I think, and I just hand coded that as an HR. And that's one of the few tags that doesn't have a closing tag. So I just added that in. So what we're going to do is two last things. So far, if we look at the CSS, and if I click here, it allows me to go back and forth in Dreamweaver from the HTML view to the CSS. So these are two different files. So remember, this is the 502 file, and this is actually the 502.css file. So they're two different things. But if I take a minute to look at my CSS, and I'm going to apply source formatting, clean up anything that might still be messy. Let's make some room here. And so I basically redefined or added some styles for tags, so body, header, so some traditional basically HTML tags, but I also basically added an ID. Now you add an ID when you only want to add style to one thing once. On this page, I'm just going to have one container. So that works fine. I don't need a class. But in the example, if you look at, if there's places where you want to like use a different color multiple times, that's when you use a class. So what we're going to do is we'll focus on that first. So we're going to click over here and we're going to create the class first, then we're going to add it to the HTML. So I'm going to click 502. I'm going to click the plus sign. What I'm going to do is classes always start with a period. So I'm going to say blue text dot period dot blue text. I'm going to click down here. And all I'm going to do is change that color to say blue text. Okay, so now if I look at my CSS, at the very bottom I can see it created this. But what I want to do now is I want to, let's make some space. And what I want to do is I want to go over to something like this, and if I highlight it, and if I go down here to CSS and the targeted rule, I should be able to see if I scroll down blue text. You see that basically when I do that, what it does is it creates a span. A span tag is similar to a div tag. It's basically just a way to contain things, right? But typically a div tag is used at the structural level like a container, and then span tags are used for something in this case. But it basically put a span tag around Netiquette page, right? And then it added this class of blue text. What that allows me to do is if I highlight this other stuff, I can keep adding this over and over again. So I'm going to take a minute and do this for each. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to take one other step and I'm going to basically add another class over here for the About Me information. Click 502 CSS, click the plus sign. Make sure I don't have any spaces, all lowercase. I'm going to basically use this dropper to come over here and get the color I want, so it matches there. I'm going to actually do my line height here less. So now that I've created it, I'm going to go over here, highlight, make sure I'm in CSS, apply it. So in this case, because I only had About Me, I could have easily made that an ID instead of a class. But hopefully this gives you a good idea on how you might do something like this. Now the contrast isn't great with that, so I could always go back over here and select a little different color. And if I found that, maybe I like this color better, I can highlight that and I could always go back to my H1 and I could always change or add a background color. Actually, I think I added it for the header, and that's fine. I could have done it to either way. I could basically just change that up just like that. They look a lot better. Okay, let's go ahead and preview this. It's going to prompt me to save it. I'm going to say yes. So that's my page, so I can compare it to the example. It's a little different in certain ways, right? But you'll notice one of the things is I have to actually change my title because it's no longer the plain page. That's fine, that's easy to fix. And this is why we take time previewing. But everything else looks pretty good. I could probably use a little bit of margin down here for my footer. And then I would want to add basically my HTML badges or my HTML and my CSS validation badges. I'd want to validate my code. So I'm going to do those two last things. I'm not going to actually go into how to validate both of those in this video, but what I am going to do is I'm going to basically click 502. I'm going to find my footer, add a top margin. So that's just going to give some of that white space there. That looks good. I'm going to add one more image, right? So if you remember when we went to this site, they also had CSS. So I'm going to just go ahead and save this. And as I said previously, a future video will show you how to really validate your code, add the links, and how to upload your files. Go to Insert, Image, CSS. I'm going to save all. I'm going to click on source code, and I'm just going to validate just to check. Okay, no errors found. That's what you want to see. So before I even try to validate outside of Dreamweaver, I try to make sure that my code looks good. I always make sure to spell check too. So you'll notice that you can spell check. And then at the end, I try to preview often in multiple browsers. So far that page looks great. So the next steps, as I mentioned, would be to validate it online, to add the validation links, and then to upload this to EDTECH too. Thanks.